Councillor Hamill is on his way. He's currently stuck on a state-controlled road. We have several start items this morning. So at the moment I have the confirmation of minutes starred, the forward planning schedule, the operational plan progress report, the monthly financial report, the beneficial enterprise policy, the community grants report, and I'd like to unstar 7.1, and it's been suggested we might star 6.7. So is everybody happy with that as for the start items? So moved by Councillor Pauline Young, seconded by Councillor Brooke Patterson. So we'll take the vote on that. All in favour? Carried. So we'll leave the attendance and apologies until a little bit later just to see where we're at with Councillor Hamill. There are no conflicts of interest, so that leaves us with the draft integrated planning framework. Good morning, Sarah. Sarah?
Good morning, everyone. I have a brief presentation, if that would be helpful. Thank you. So I know that this item has been previously discussed by councillors. So what I'll take you through, and the item's obviously there for your information, I'll take you through the integrated planning framework, the work that's been done to date, and where to from here. So in terms of the framework, this presentation will give you a bit of an overview of the work that has been completed, an update on next steps, as I discussed earlier. But in terms of the framework itself, I'd really like to start with the purpose and expected benefits from this framework. Obviously, this piece of work has been discussed previously, but one of the things that I think was for the aims of this framework is really trying to integrate long-term planning, medium and short-term planning, right down to individual objectives for staff across the organisation. So in terms of this framework, the aims of the ultimate aims of this are to ensure that we, one, have a high-performing organisation, but two, actually strengthen our customer focus across all of our plans. So what are the outcomes for the community? How are we delivering against those, and how are we ensuring our performance is as expected? Obviously, that focus should improve value for money, because we should be focusing our investments on those things that are going to have the best benefit for our community. But also underpinning that is financial and organisational sustainability. So this framework also includes things like our financial forecasting, asset management planning, infrastructure planning as well. In terms of accountability, each of these plans we're going to have, obviously we already have accountable officers, but there's going to be a more transparent approach to accountability around all of these planning components, not only to council but also the community. And then ultimately ensuring that staff on the ground in their day-to-day work know what their contribution is to achieving the longer term plans for the city and our city vision. So that's a rounded view of the benefits, and those will be further developed as we develop the framework. You'll have seen from the report, the framework itself, this is a draft, and it will remain a draft until we've gone through the implementation planning phase, because through that phase there may be some tweaks and changes that are needed to this draft model, but this is a starting point for what the framework will look like moving forward. And I'll go through each of these kind of tiers of the framework. So in terms of longer term planning, the proposal is that we have obviously our city vision, which is inspired by lifestyle driven by opportunity, that will remain. And underneath that we'll have Gold Coast 2032 themes and aspirations, which will drive down through the organisation those themes right through, down through all our planning, right through to an individual level at council. Gold Coast 2032 is being proposed as a key new plan for the city at a 10-year level, defining longer-term outcomes for the city. And lots of other jurisdictions across Australia, in terms of local governments, have longer-term plans at a 10-year level, so it's not unusual to see that across Australia. So that's the proposal, is we have a 10-year plan that drives that down. Now, in terms of the work already undertaken to date on that, obviously, as councillors, you've already been involved in Gold Coast 2032, what that 10-year aspiration is. It's really building a plan out from that initial starting point. And obviously, we've just been out to the community on those aspirations and themes. So some of that work has already started. In terms of the tiers of plan that sit under Gold Coast 2032, we've got obviously the city plan, and we're proposing that in the fullness of time that's renamed to the Gold Coast Planning Scheme. Some of the feedback we had was that people were confused about what the city plan was. They thought it was a plan for the whole city, not just for our town planning component. The proposal is to rename that, but not yet. That we'll be waiting until the next iteration of the city plan or town plan, which I think is about 2026. Other plans which would sit under that would be service plans. We have, as you know, a wide range of services across the city. We're looking to have 10-year plans for each of our services. At the moment, obviously, we do have, in many cases, some of those plans, but they're not necessarily consistent, and we don't have plans for every service, even though we have service financial forecasts. So it's really trying to consolidate our planning. So at a service plan level, we would have outcomes for all our services and KPIs. And council would then understand on an annual basis how those services are tracking and what investment might be needed. Those service plans would be linked to our asset management plans, and obviously those assets really support the delivery of those services across the city. And again, that would be connected to our service financial forecast. A lot of this work already takes place, but it might not be consistent in every area of the city. Other long-term plans obviously include the local government infrastructure plan, water net serve plan and others. So these will be connected together and would sit under Gold Coast 2032. So they would be supporting the delivery of our 10-year plan. Then on the right-hand side there, we have long-term strategies. So we already have a number of these, and a lot of them are connected with our major infrastructure in the city, such as transport. Those would continue, but would need to connect into Gold Coast 2032. So as those strategies are getting reviewed, the question is, they need to connect directly to the outcomes in Gold Coast 2032. So they will be delivery mechanisms for Gold Coast 2032, where long-term strategies are required, which are longer than, obviously, some of those short ones which may not rely on infrastructure and other things. So that's the higher order. In terms of the medium-term planning, we have something called the council plan in the middle here. Now that is also known as our corporate plan. Corporate plan is the legislative name in the Local Government Act. We're proposing that gets renamed to council plan because, again, the feedback we've received is that corporate plan, some of the feedback is that some of our stakeholders believe that's our internal organisational plan, not something to do with the community. So we're suggesting it gets renamed council plan, which is about the strategic direction of the local government area. It's led by council, and it is council's plan for the next 5 years. That name is used in other jurisdictions in Australia for that plan. Other names are municipal plan, delivery program, but we think council plan probably is a better name for that plan. And that plan, as you know, is coming to council shortly, and that defines the next 5 years and the outcomes for the city for the coming 5 years. Now, supporting that plan, we will have an organisational plan, and that's a new plan, which is about our organisation, our capability, our skills, our capacity to support the organisation to deliver our council plan. On the left, then, we'll have medium-term strategies. So some of those will be shorter-term strategies that need to be more agile, more frequently reviewed, which maybe don't rely on long-term infrastructure. It could be culture, it could be economy. It's those things which maybe don't rely on a longer-term view, and that'll be discussed by council. But those outcomes will be sitting in the corporate plan. So the corporate plan outcomes will have potentially strategies, but they must be sitting very much in and nested in that council plan. Then on the right, we've got a capital works programme. At the moment, that's a 4-year. We're looking to extend that to 5 to match our council plan. So that you have a 5-year CapEx programme, a 5-year council plan. And then at the bottom tier here is the annual view. So we already have an annual plan, a city budget and city operational plan, which drives our investments and activities for the coming year. Underneath that, we'll have directorate and branch business plans, driving down to individual performance plans. So that we have a line of sight really from top to bottom, driven down through the organisation. So that's a very brief overview of the proposed draft framework, and obviously there will be an implementation planning phase next. In terms of the bars on the side, and this is again is very high level, obviously one of the key elements of input to all of our planning are our community aspirations and other external influences like state and federal governments and partners across the city. And then at the bottom we have our governance arrangements, performance and compliance and risk. So this is really a high-level view to kind of demonstrate, I guess, how planning fits within the city, but also all those influences that sit outside but also support the planning framework. In terms of where we are today, we've done that first phase, which is a draft framework, but it very much is a draft. As we get into the implementation plan, we'll be contacting stakeholders across the city with all of these plans to work out how these pieces interact, inputs and outputs, and how it's all going to work, and new standards that are required around planning. And that may tweak and change this framework, and obviously we'll be bringing that back to you, any tweaks and changes. And then once that framework is approved, we'll then go into implementation. And that may take more than one cycle, depending on where we are in the planning cycle, because some of these things would need to be started at a particular time in the year to ensure they meet the next planning cycle. So I'll stop there. Any questions?
Are there any questions, councillors? Councillor Gates.
Thank you, Chairman. So does that mean that the corporate plan won't become the council plan until next corporate plan?
No. We'd be looking to change that name as soon as possible.
Immediately?
Yes. It doesn't change our legislative requirements. That's simply a name change.
Well, I support that. I was hopeful of that being the outcome. Thank you.
Can I just in terms of timing, so we've got on Special Budget Committee tomorrow, we've got the agenda for corporate plan, and then that's going to the special council meeting on Tuesday. So that's at that point, we're suggesting that council actually endorses this as a council plan rather than corporate plan.
Thank you.
It occurs to me that all the strategic plans and service plans and long-term plans on the document on page 30 look like they're captured inside that Gold Coast 2032 plan. But the burden on officers and obviously on councillors to adopt all those kind of 10-year plans in 1 year would be quite. Is there a way we could reflect that those service plans and long-term plans might be kind of staggered?
Yeah.
It doesn't look like that on the design, but I think from a public perspective, what we don't want to have is, in 2022, all of the 10-year plans be done, and then in 2032 we do all the 10-year plans. There needs to be like a...
Through the chair, absolutely. The implementation plan will be proposing a way forward on this. It may be over a number of years, absolutely. Obviously, if we're looking at 10-year plans for services, we'll be looking at those ones probably first that are more complex, higher risk, have more significant investment moving through that cycle. So absolutely, there's going to be a period of time for this plan to actually deliver the whole of this framework. This is a future state framework.
Yeah, I suppose it'd be good in that, that page 30 document, for there to be an addendum of sorts that says our natural city strategy and, here's the time frame for each of those with actually a pictorial indication of when their 10-year periods start and finish. So we can be aware, okay, well, when someone asks us a question about, well, why are we doing this body of work, then we can say, well, it forms part of that strategy and that'll be up for review at this time, and it allows us to direct public inquiry to the time frame that makes most sense for the council and not necessarily for the query.
Just through the chair, so I think it's unrealistic. I think that's what you're saying. For all the strategies to be 10 years, and then in 10 years' time we do them all, redevelop them. So there'll be some sort of rolling program depending on what the strategy is. So that's part
and that will form part of the implementation
plan. Yes.
Okay.
So through the chair, there will be an implementation plan for this framework, and as I say, there may be some tweaks, but absolutely there's going to be a staggered approach to this over a number of years, and we're going to be putting together the milestones in terms of when those things will change over. But in terms of the strategies, some of them may not be 5 or 10, but they may be 3, they may be 15. It's more about they need to connect with our 2 key strategic plans, Gold Coast 2032 and the council plan.
And follow-up question, is there any of the service plans or long-term plans or strategies that we currently have that in going through this process we've worked out that maybe we don't need? I mean, it seems like there's quite a lot. Yes. I don't know.
Through the chair, I mean, the outcomes for Gold Coast 2032 and the council plan will really, and the KPIs will be looking to indicate which strategies we need, which ones we don't. For instance, if council believes we need to move further and faster on a particular outcome in Gold Coast 2032 or the council plan, we may need a strategy for that doesn't exist now. But if we're already satisfied that we're meeting the KPIs we want to meet, then probably a strategy would no longer be required. We're back to business as usual. So absolutely, there will be that consideration through the implementation planning.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? So I just had a question in regards to that proposed name changing from City Plan to the Gold Coast Planning Scheme. Has that been discussed with at the directorate level as well, and they're supportive of it.
Yes, through the chair, it has been discussed with the director, economy, planning, environment, and yes, happy to consider that change, but not until the next iteration of the major review of that plan.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that was discussed at ELT, so
Yep, thank you.
CEO and the directors are aware of and recommend that.
And as has been mentioned directly to Councillor Caldwell, do you know? Okay. So between now and council, we'll just make sure that he's aware as well. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, through you. So is the reason why we can't do it to 2026, so is that a legislative thing? You can't change it without actually changing it as a city plan amendment. Is there a reason why we couldn't just change it now?
I'd have to take that question on notice. I think the key reason is it's well known as a city plan currently. There's an awful lot of collateral out with the business.
Right.
And I think the view was that it would be probably better to wait till that next major review.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and given how long it takes for a review to go through the state system, that probably makes sense as well. So were there any other questions? Councillor Young, you're right? So I'm happy to move it. Councillor Gates is happy to second it. And anybody want to speak for or against it? Excellent. So all in favour? Carried unanimously. Outstanding. Thank you, Sarah. Telecommunications leasing. Sorry, Councillor Kidd. Okay. Or Colliers. We'll wait. So we're just going to pause for Councillor Gates to get a piece of paper from her office. Councillor Patterson, you're right?
While we're pausing, we can talk about the awesome decision last night for our Gold Coast Citizen of the Year, Hal Rice.
If we could.
Dr. Hal Rice. Very exciting.
So, ladies, Councillor Gates is going to have a conflict of interest around Colliers, so I don't know if you have one of those for her, I don't know. I think overall the last night showed how many really awesome people the Gold Coast has doing awesome things. So, and I think it's great that they were all recognised, you know, so clearly Dr. Hal, that I think just the depth of the nominees was really pretty impressive. So I've got a big soft spot for Baby Gives Back, and when you hear how many people that they've helped, and they actually came, there's a St Kilda's Mums model which they base themselves on, and they're almost at the same size, 4 or 5 years younger than what's happening in Victoria, and they've just expanded up into Brisbane. So I just think that it's amazing what dedicated people can do. And then
really good
the lawnmower man, you know, he made a point to me that prior to raising $1.5 million for Bravehearts, he'd raised over $200,000 for a youth centre on the Gold Coast as well. So it's just, and that's just pushing a lawnmower and making people give him money. It's awesome.
So, I'm not with that idea. I'll push a lawnmower around the country.
Yeah, and his first run is he made $38,000 and hasn't stopped since. So he's the Forrest Gump of lawnmowers.
I thought it was quite good that a number of the finalists were doctors.
Yeah.
It was quite quite helpful in light of the circumstances as well.
G'day, Mark.
We waited.
I know how this chair works. So while Councillor Gates is just compiling her conflict of interest, do you just want to go tidy yourself up? Go on.
Is that a direction?
Yeah, go on. Off you go. We've waited this long for you.
William Senior.
Well, we can't be 4/5 of the way there, Mark. What's that? Permission to approach Brooke. So having ignored the memo, he then got a direction. Yep. Anyone? I've had no contact with the consultant in relation to the item, but like to participate given the importance of the decision to the future of the Gold Coast. And I'd be happy to move the following. So the same words that councillor that were used for.
I
City.
had no discussion with
I was just.
the consultant. God, I was lucky I picked that one. I nearly missed that. No, they're supposed to.
Permission to enter the room, Mark. What's that? Yeah. So well, you were looking a bit tardy, you know, and now you're sharp, and that's good. I did.
Should be a new rule.
Right. So, Councillor Gates, you've made that declaration. Are you happy with what you've declared?
I have had no contact. I have had. Thank you.
And I'd like to move that Councillor Gates may participate in the decision despite the councillor's conflict of interest, because the public interest is served by the contribution and that outweighs the perceived nature of the conflict. And thank you, Councillor Pauline Young. And Joe, we will call a division, but before we do that, can we just make sure that those standard words are available for a control, whatever it is, for all of the committees, so that we know exactly what we're wanting to do and we're consistent? So, councillors, will call a division on that, because that's what we're required to do. So, in favour of Councillor Gates participating?
Councillor Hamill, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Bartle-Lumsden, Councillor Taylor, Councillor Pauline Young and Councillor McDonald and Councillor Jones.
Thank you. Now, councillors, we can now chat about the telecommunication leasing. So even though all three gentlemen haven't worn a tie to the committee, does anybody have any questions in regards to the telecommunications? Councillor Hamill.
Mr Chair, I had a question that was actually put to me by the federal member that covers the area of Cedar Creek. He requested I ask the committee to see if the policy allows for any flexibility when negotiating with one of the providers who don't see an area as commercially viable because of the amount of residents and therefore the amount of customers that might use the area. So there's a noted black spot area out at Cedar Creek that they have been unsuccessful in getting a provider to want to build a tower there because they don't have enough customers to connect into it.
So is that in the context of locating a tower on city-controlled land?
Yes.
And us wanting to charge them a fee that they then
should charge the same fee as what we charge for if it was in the middle of Broadbeach, for example, in terms of the customer base that it can support?
Okay, so guys, you want to have a go?
I can answer that, Mr Chair. Councillor, I was just thinking about this morning when I was walking the dog, and the...
oh, that's very loose.
That's some strange, yeah.
The question that we had, and we had a discussion in the recent past about that, the constraint that we have is a constraint imposed upon us by the local government regulation, and that regulation says that we can only dispose of an interest in land, and an interest in land includes a lease. We can only dispose of an interest in land at market value. So in terms of the flexibility the federal member talks about, we could only be flexible insofar as the rent under that lease is at or above market value. And what we've tried to do in this new policy is adopt a tiered approach to determining value. Previously, under the existing policy, the situation was that we adopted what we colloquially call a portfolio approach to rent, where we established a single rent which would apply no matter where you were in the city. And that basically, as I explained before, that needed to be set at the highest value site of the city to comply with the legislation. Yep. So, for example, if the highest value site was a site in Surfers Paradise and the market value was $30,000, a situation, in a more remote location, under that policy approach, the rent would also need to be $30,000, even though the market value, objectively would be far less. So what we've tried to do in this situation is to come up with a tiered system where we can treat rents on the basis that there's a more close nexus between the underlying fundamental value and the rent that we charge under our policy.
Yeah. Oh. Mr Chair, it sounds like I can take that as that the federal member can talk to those communications providers and they can have another stab out there.
So I think the challenge the federal member may need to acknowledge is the fact that we're controlled by state legislation that requires us to do what we're doing. But if there's the federal government who are responsible for telecommunications wanted to deliver into black spots, maybe they could come up when they're in government with a scheme that allowed for the subsidy into those black spots. You know, so that'll be the workaround. You just might need to wait 4 years.
Sorry, missed it.
What's that, sorry?
There is also a government.
Yeah, there is, but the federal member that's raised it was previously in government and currently isn't.
It'd be fair to say, Mr. Chair, that I may have already put that to him a few times, and this was just good timing that I knew there was a review of this coming up. Yep. We have done what we can under the current legislation, and I think it's actually a fairly positive move. And I'll be writing back to him to pretty well say the ball's in his court and he can go deal with the state and his now new federal government on trying to get some assistance from their side.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions in regards to the policy? So I'm happy to move it. If anybody would like to second it. Seconded Councillor Gates. I acknowledge the fact that the recommendation that the officers has made is slightly different to what was originally proposed by the consultant, but I think that you've probably reached a sensible middle ground. So, and I suppose the only thing that I can say in regards to Councillor Hamill's question is that it is a policy, and a policy potentially might be able to be changed by a general business item through council, but you'd need to go through that whole process of making sure we satisfied our obligations in regards to disposal of an asset. Anybody like to speak against it? Okay, we'll take the vote. All in favour? Carried. Thank you. Councillors, that leaves us with 7.1. Now, councillors, 7.1 is notionally a closed item, but if we can see if we can have a discussion that doesn't involve us mentioning any numbers, we may not need to go to close. So, councillors, did anybody have any questions? Councillor Tozer?
I had a question about the proportion of PPR and permanent rentals that are under debt management.
What was the question in regards to that?
The proportion. I don't want to know any personal information, but just the proportion of total debt management. Yeah.
Yep. So, Lee?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I have to take that on advisement, Councillor. I don't have the split. We just have the whole of city figure in the item.
Piece of cake. It'd be great if you could take it on notice. That'd be great.
Yep. Yeah, Handball is a new guy.
What proportion of PPR or permanent rental category, which is the category 2 ratepayers, are under debt management? I've got some sort of either payment plan or, what proportion are being managed?
Yeah. So it's been taken on notice, and Mr. Callender will provide an answer to all councillors, including those councillors not on the committee. Councillor Polignan.
And thanks through the chair. I think through to Leah. If the changing in our bank interest rates is obviously going to impact on people, with a mortgage and things like that, do we see that being a flow on to our rates and in the next quarter?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Unknown, councillor. We believe that probably the people in recent times, say a figure of 6 to 9 months, any people that have taken a mortgage out in that period of time, I believe that the Big Four have been building in some capacity for interest rate rises. However, people with longer term mortgages may well fall into the distressed state, which is technically 30% of their pre-tax income. At this stage, the arrears are marginally higher than last year, as indicated in the item. Some of that we think because as part of the assistance package the council granted, we suspended recovery action in full for a period of 7 months in this financial year. So we're just back into the swing of things again. But again, all of the options to assist, vulnerable ratepayers, payment arrangements, etc., there have been put in place, and we try to encourage anyone to speak to us. And if we can get them into in a payment arrangement, there's no interest penalty applied. The point on the interest rates rising is fair, and in the new financial year, we will be looking to apply a penalty rate for the penalty interest that's commensurate with what we can do under the legislation, which is, I suppose, the 90-day cash rate for the March quarter, plus a maximum of 8% on top of that.
Okay. And I think it's, I'm sorry, through the chair to you, I think it's just a comment. I think it's going to be something that we'll be talked more and more about in the public, and unfortunately we're going into that very high CPI, and we've got, a rate potential change to the rates being endorsed next week. So I think, it'll be a flow-on compounding sort of thing. So whether we can be ahead of the game when it comes to, I guess, correspondence back to our residents and that, because it just seems to be a bit of a conversation piece out there now. So thank you.
Well, I think and to pick up on that, I think the best thing that we can do to our residents who may be in a financial struggle because of the increase in mortgages
in everything
is to encourage them, if they can't meet their rates payment, to enter into an arrangement with the city as soon as possible to stop the clock, in particular on the interest, and to actually make sure that it doesn't get away from them. So I think that what the practical thing that council laws can do in that space, in my mind, is to encourage them to have an open and honest conversation with the council staff about getting onto a payment arrangement rather than putting their head in the sand and letting it go. So, councillors, are there any other questions? So I'm happy to move it, and I won't speak to it, but I'm going to speak, if I can, to Lee. Lee is presenting to the Governance Administration Finance Committee for the last time as a council officer, unless we call him back, and he's already shaking his head. And I just thought it would be remiss of me not to mention some of the highlights of Lee's career with the City of Gold Coast. And Lee, we'll start with the obvious. I think you will appreciate that all of the gentlemen that have attended the committee meeting today have dressed as a tribute to you. So we haven't quite got the same style in regards to the colour of our shirts or our ties, but you definitely have left a mark in regards to city officers attending committee meetings in regards to your, and I was going to say lows, but I won't, But
not in open anyway.
Lee's worked for the City of Gold Coast for 43 years, which is an outstanding period of service for our city. You started in 1978, and you were a junior clerical officer at Bundall, and you were appointed to regulated parking section in 1980, and normally some of us might make a reference to some of the younger councillors like Mark Hamill, but I'll make a reference to myself and say that in 1980, when I was in grade 6, I hadn't quite got around to getting my learner's permit, so you wouldn't have regulated me. You then did a period of service with the city at the Keith Hunt Community Entertainment and Arts Centre, which is now known as HODA. You patched across to the finance department in 1988 as part of the the Expo 88 celebrations, I reckon, and you were involved with as the payroll officer when pay packets were still full of cash and delivered to staff under police escort across all administration centres and depots. You then became clerk in charge of rate recoveries and inquiries, and you remained there until the amalgamation of the Albert Shire and the Gold Coast City. You were eventually seconded to manage the Revenue Services branch of Organisational Services in 2015, and you've been responsible for some 50 plus staff and controlling the issue and recovery of $1.4 billion of council annual revenue. So, Lee, you're a pretty important part of the organisation when you can say that you were actually, over the last 9 or 10 years, been responsible for collecting about $10 billion of revenue. So without you, the city would have ground to a halt, I reckon, I can say that. But you've also got you've had an enormous amount of support from your council colleagues and your family, and so we also acknowledge Corrie's 30 years with the. Where are you, Corrie? Corrie's waving to us.
Yeah, the fashion consultant.
Sorry,
it's my fashion consultant.
Fashion consultant. Oh, oops. So, but Corrie's been with the city as well for 30 years, and I don't know how she's managed to put up with you for that long, but the good news is that Corrie is staying with us for a period of time, I hope, as you realise that living life with Lee in retirement might be a struggle, you know. So your last day at council will be the 15th of July, and Lee, you're going to leave a really big hole, and we'll miss you. And I've got a couple of other people that want to join in as well. So Joe would like to say some words, and then Councillor Gates is going to finish it off.
Just briefly, I won't go into the detail, but unfortunately I can remember most of those things that you read out that Lee did. And I've known Lee for, I think, 50 years, probably, school, the old Aquinas College, and, you know,
St Vincent's.
The best, never hurt anyone, but Lee was a couple of grades older than me, so I'll just mention that. But as well as, I think, all the sort of the functional stuff that Councillor James was talking about, I think Lee's made a great contribution to the culture of the organisation. Great sense of humour, can make a joke out of anything. We've got I guess the arrangement that Lee and I have had over the years in terms of, you know, rating structures and those sorts of things. I take the credit for stuff that the councillors like, and he takes the blame for stuff that they don't. So it's worked pretty well at the moment. So. So we've had a great working relationship, I think, and Lee's also made a great contribution to the community. He's life member at Narang Soccer Club, A-grade player, I think. A-grade cricket player at Queen's. Not sure if you're a life member there, but pretty close. So, and he left arm spinner and batsman. So he's had a pretty good career in terms of his sporting prowess. Yeah, Lee's going to be greatly missed through the organisation, not just for what he's done, but for the culture, and he really brightens up the organisation, and we'll miss him, and all the best for Corrie, Jacko and the family.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Gates.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to say, Lee, that there's been an unacceptable level of gender bias today, because if I knew that it was shirt and tie day, I would have worn one. But I'm sure that we females on this committee were not
I'll take responsibility for the bias.
The fact that we could have, I might be a teal. Look out, Crando. I really just wanted to say, Lee, thank you for everything over the years. I mean, the level of detail that Lee has always gone to answer any inquiries that we've had has been just 150%, Lee. So you've been the go-to guy for us for so many years, and we'll miss you greatly.
Thanks. Councillor McDonald.
Lee, I'll be really sorry to see you go, because you've been my go-to man for many years, and there is a soft spot with Lee. I've had many of my ratepayers that have become they've had financial struggles, and Lee's been able to sit down with them, spend extra time with them to make sure that they're in a payment method that they can handle. Because, as we all know, it's a serious thing when we have to put properties up for sale. And Lee's been very good in that department in helping out, not only in collecting funds for the Gold Coast City, but certainly with helping our ratepayers. And I just want to thank you for your service, and I'll certainly miss you, and I'm sure that Council will miss you. And thanks very much for your contribution. It's really been appreciated. And in your retirement or whatever you decide to do, I wish you all the best. Thanks, Lee.
Thank you, Councillor McDonald. Lee, don't go. Don't go. We're going to do something. I think for the first time ever, we're going to vote on a recommendation because we have to do that. And you might get a standing ovation for actually getting this recommendation through. So, councillors, all in favour of Lee's recommendation? Thank you. And Lee, thank you. Should we let him have a right to reply?
He doesn't want one.
There's a question I have to leave first. So getting back to work. Not a work question.
Yeah, okay.
Two questions, actually. So through you, Mr Chair, first of all, exactly what colour do you call that shirt?
Can I take that under advisement? What colour do I call it?
Yeah. I think he calls it whatever colour Corey tells him it is, right?
It was intended to be a shade of maroon today.
Yeah.
So.
And secondly, Mr Chair, I was just wondering how after 25 years you still hadn't managed to explain to Councillor Castro how rates are raised.
It happened in the first 5 minutes of the meeting, so he missed it there. One thing I would like to say, thank you very much for the tie and collars, gentlemen, and the ladies for the would have could have. The only comment though is the jeans and collar and tie don't really rock it. So apologies, Councillor Tozer and Chairman. So
wow.
Thank you so much. Okay. It never happens nicely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Rightio, I think we've reached the end of the meeting. Thanks, Lee. Councillor McDonald seconded that motion. What's that? Yeah, make sure you get his key card, Paul. Rightio, at 9:52, I reckon our business is done. Thank you for your attendance and your spirited bidding.